Welcome to the New World Order Showcase Podcast.
Your host, Jill Hart, the Coach's Alchemist. Couldn't be more excited to have you join us today. On this podcast, we celebrate the champions of change, the up-and-coming life, health and transformational coaches who are fearlessly stepping forward to make a difference in the world. Get ready for inspiring stories, practical tips, and powerful moments that will motivate you to make a positive change in your life and those around you. We're happy to have you join us on this incredible journey as we dive into the world of life, health, and transformational coaches who are lighting up the path towards a better tomorrow.
Welcome to the New World Order Showcase Podcast. Today, our guest is Daniel Gospodarek, who is founder of Revitalize Mental Health, PLLC in Denver, Colorado. He's a licensed clinical social worker in private therapy practice, where he works with individuals who are impacted by bipolar, major depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and traumatic brain injuries, also known as TBIs. He also works with couples whose relationships are impacted by mental illness. One fact that led Daniel to becoming a therapist was his own experience with a TBI back in 2009 and his own recovery process. Daniel's mission is to support and empower those who experience mental health, addiction, and trauma challenges to achieve the lives they desire. Please help me welcome Daniel to the show. Welcome to the podcast, Daniel. It's so nice to have you here. We're talking a little bit about you living in Colorado and came through this area. And so tell us a little bit about what you're doing and how you're doing it.
For sure. So I started my company based in Denver, Colorado, primarily to serve people who have experienced traumatic brain injuries, past trauma, sexual abuse, military abuse, or it could be sexual abuse in the military, combat trauma, thought disorders to include schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, and then mood disorders too. So I lump anxiety in there, but also bipolar, major depression, and those are my four kind of target areas that I've really wanted to try to serve in the Colorado community, thanks to the telehealth boom that took place a few years ago. So effectively wanting to make a positive impact in the community and change people's lives so that they can really live the life that they desire and maybe unshackle or learn to live with symptoms of mental illness and still achieve their values and hit the life that they want to get to.
That's a very noble undertaking. Do you have an actual office? Do you work out of your house? How does that?
Yeah, so great question. So I actually only rent space on the weekends, a little office off of I-25 and Evans in Denver. And there are people who want services in person, and I'm more than happy to provide those. And then there are people that I see scattered across the state, and telehealth works just fine. So we've had really good success, or I've seen really good success with cognitive processing therapy to target trauma, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy over telehealth, and I've seen it in person too. So it kind of is whatever works. And I have some people locally too are just too busy, and telehealth works.
Yeah, it's so much more convenient to just show up at the screen than have to get in your car or travel across town, and you never know about traffic and
exactly.
storms.
Exactly. And, I offer sessions in the evenings throughout the week. So 5, 6, 7, and 8. So people can get their children to sleep or give them to a family member or whomever they are. Right. And kind of accommodate those schedules for people work hard here. Right. Denver's expensive. People are working 2, 3 jobs or, trying to find creative living situations with roommates and stuff like that. So being flexible is huge.
Yeah, that is really important. So who would you say your ideal client is? I know you said you listed all the things that you treated, but who would be somebody that would say, yeah, hey, I need you.
Yeah. So I think anyone who is at a point in their life where, their mental health symptoms have gotten to a point, or maybe their traumatic brain injury has gotten them to a point where they're like, I need to make some hard changes in my life and have somebody to hold me accountable and challenge me, but also support me with compassion and just genuineness, and also look at me as a human that, they may fail. Clients struggle all the time, but so do we as therapists, right? Like,
Yeah, everybody
that's
does.
not immune to the human race. Like, we all have our struggles, right? We all have challenges with avoidance or escape or control or whatever it might be that shows up in the office. So those folks that are wanting to make that change, wanting to make that either 180 or that hard pivot, and also committed to the process, right? Because therapy, depending on what you've experienced in your life, and obviously we don't know that until we start unpacking stuff, it can take 6 months, 9 months. It can also take a few years, depending on if there's been long childhood trauma, right? And we're looking at complex post-traumatic stress disorder or things of that nature.
I know firsthand how impactful it can be, and how long that it can take. I have a really good friend who went through complex post-traumatic stress syndrome from raising a child, a foster care, or an adopted kid. She got out of foster care and just had so many issues. And over a period, it took almost 4 years, but she went from hardly being able to function. I mean, literally, it was amazing to me how much she struggled with just the basics of life. She's gone on to getting her life coaching certification now. She's just like, she figured it out, and she's gotten control of her life, and she's just like embracing life.
Yeah.
And I mean, just the difference that having a good coach, counselor, therapist can make is amazing.
It can be quite impactful, and finding that goodness of fit is very important too, because not all therapists match with every person. Not every person's going to match with a single therapist, and like a therapist will be able to pick up on that over a number of sessions, and can have that hard conversation of, I get that you're struggling, and I may not be that person or that facilitator for that growth, but here are some, vetted referrals in the community that you can access, right? And I think also when you're in this therapy process and the recovery process, right, it's not just all about talking, it's also about feeling, it's also about learning how your body feels, right? And our culture doesn't do a good job of teaching those skills, right? It's very just boom, 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 and then you put your head down in the pillow and you do it all again the next day, right? And slowing that down and integrating different pieces of material inside of the therapy session that can really facilitate those light bulbs or change those neural networks. There are some amazing TED Talks out there about people who have schizophrenia that are directors of, doctoral programs at high class universities, right? Or are holding down multiple jobs and raising kids, right? So it's not like this mental illness or traumatic brain injury has to be your defining label, right?
And it doesn't have to cripple you.
Right.
You can learn the tools to actually thrive in those situations. Whereas, years ago, they just used to lock people up, and
right.
like, you're done. But we've come so far. You want to talk a little bit about cognitive behavioral therapy and also EMDR? Because those are kind of newer modalities. Not everybody knows what they are.
Sure. So cognitive behavioral therapy was created actually in the 80s, but it took a while. It took a little bit to gain a lot of mainstream awareness. And essentially, cognitive behavioral, right? It looks at cognitions, it looks at behaviors. How do they interact? Wow, I'm struggling with the words. interact with each other, right? Our thoughts can increase or decrease certain behaviors. Our behaviors can also impact our thoughts, right? And we're looking at the relationship there, and depending on where you've come from, how you've grown up, right? The environment in which you were raised, we develop these beliefs about ourselves. Some of them can be very positive, that I'm competent, or I'm loved and supported. And some of them are, I am not loved, I'm incompetent, or the world is this dangerous place, right? And those then impact how we perceive everything in our environment, right? And it takes a long time to shift those beliefs, right? Especially if most of them started in early childhood or adolescence. So it can take years, right? Because sometimes people show up and they're like, okay, let's do 6 months of therapy. And it's like, well, you lived with this for 25 years, right?
Yeah, 6 months is not going to do a lot.
Right. We're already fighting a teeter-totter, right? So that's a big one. And then cognitive processing therapy is a derivative of CBT, but it's actually only for people who meet the post-traumatic stress disorder threshold on the PCL-5 scales, which are just ways to rate trauma symptoms. And then eye movement desensitization reprocessing, or EMDR, it's a beautiful intervention to look at not only complex post-traumatic stress disorder, but also PTSD alone, and also just smaller traumas. Like if maybe you were, giving a presentation at work and you tripped going up the stairs, and there's a lot of embarrassment and maybe shame or guilt involved, right? EMDR can also target those smaller traumas, which is nice, where CBT is only for the PTSD threshold. And it's a way of just kind of allowing and restarting, kind of jump-starting your body's innate ability to heal from the inside out, by looking at like what is some of that dysfunctional material that's maybe pent up in our nervous system that we just need to release, right? And when we experience that shame or guilt, it often acts like blocks in our nervous system and how we communicate and internally. And that EMDR just kind of hollows that out, or allows it to be integrated into our system, so that we don't feel that stress, we don't feel that burden anymore. Doesn't erase the memories, right? It can maybe shape how we relate to some of the memories, but at the same time, it doesn't, you lose kind of that like toxic charge associated with those events. So it's very powerful. There's a lot of evidence on all three of those modalities. So
there's a surprisingly large body of evidence and science that is going into a lot of these new modalities that are coming out, and even things like just meditating, the impact that it can have on your whole physiology,
right?
From changing the brain patterns that of your thoughts that generate, when you have a thought, it generates a chemical response. And that does something to the rest of your body. And most people don't even think about thinking, but everything starts in your head.
Yeah. And I think what you're seeing is a lot of therapies, like over the decades, are starting to shift and not just look at mental illness as only like through a Western or a US perspective, but we're starting to really incorporate Western medicine, right, into that mindfulness meditation, right, breath work, parts work, whatever it might be. And you're also seeing many different interventions and therapy modalities come of that. Like one of the other cognitive behavioral therapy derivatives is acceptance and commitment therapy, right? And that is one that I actually align with much more than CBT, just because you're not dealing just with a lot of thoughts, you're also integrating that mindfulness through present moment focus, right? It can be very gentle when you start figuring out, where do you feel shame in your body? And people are like, what are you talking about? Right? Because our society doesn't teach that awareness.
We don't even teach our kids how to identify their emotions.
Yeah.
We just tell them be quiet and sit down.
Exactly. Or we tell them that you're not hurt, or you're not, like, you don't have to be sad, right? Which is also a smaller form of gaslighting.
Yeah. Yeah, you should be sad. This is a sad situation.
Exactly.
And that's the emotion you're feeling. Go ahead and have your feels.
Right. If you need a hug, I'm here.
Yeah. Yeah. My daughter, I have 5 kids, but my youngest daughter, she's always about her feels. She would cry sometimes just because. And she would say, I'm just crying because, Mom. And I would say, well, just let me hold you, Sarah.
Yeah.
And we'd sit there and she'd cry. And she wasn't sad. She
Mm-hmm.
really was not sad. She just needed that emotional release, and she recognized it. She's one of the most emotionally intelligent human beings I've ever met.
Right.
Recognizing she's my daughter, but she's just an amazing human being.
Yeah, that's beautiful, right? Because our society also shuns emotions, right?
Mhm.
Just suck it up, keep going, right? And not saying that we shouldn't be able to persevere and have persistence, right? Because those come into play in relationships, those come into play at work, right? Those come play into our own recovery. And also by saying just, keep going and suck it up without noting that, hey, what I'm feeling is actually valid, right? That's okay.
Yeah. And sometimes you just need to release emotions, and it comes out as tears.
For sure.
That's how we were created.
Right. Or anger, right?
Yeah.
It's okay to be angry. It's what you do with that anger, right? It's how you channel it. And there's a really cool documentary out there. It's called The Mask You Live In. And it talks about how, from a young age, young men, especially young boys, are channeled to, play sports and follow directions. And also a lot of them end up moving into like football or hockey, right? And those are sports that pride anger, right? That pride rage. And then they graduate from high school and they're like, well, what do I do with these emotions now? Because I don't have anyone to hit on the football field, right? So, and they're not developing those other skills to be like, okay, I can also go for a walk. I can also go for a swim, right? Or a jacuzzi or a hot tub, whatever it might be that works for that individual. And then they end up in handcuffs, right? Because they drink and then they hit somebody or whatever it might be. So it's fascinating when you start looking at the systemic issues within our society as well that contribute to some of these personal challenges then.
Yeah. And it's not just men. Women have these problems too. It's in the more women step out and try to be everything to everybody, because that's what's expected of us. And you lose the ability to be able to say, no, I have to have boundaries. This is my space and my time. And we'll have to make other arrangements.
Right.
And teaching kids boundaries and respecting your kids' boundaries.
Right. And teaching them to respect ours, right?
Well, yeah. You would expect that they would respect yours as their parent.
Yes.
But having boundaries as a parent, and there are a lot of people that don't.
Yeah.
They don't understand. I, as a parent, need to have boundaries with my children. And I need to allow my children to have boundaries with me.
Yeah.
So that I'm not injuring them too.
Exactly. One of the areas where our society really runs kind of boundaries out the door is in the workplace, right? Extra tasks that are outside of your job description, right? And just more. And it's like, how do you learn to say no without like getting fired?
Right. And at what point do you go from being an employee to just being a slave? There are a lot of situations where the line is very thin.
There is. And a lot of people, that's awareness too around like being cogs in the wheel. And I'm not telling people to go, quit their day jobs, right? Like we need to have income to support those we love and ourselves, but to have that awareness of like, is this also like what my life's about, right? Or is there more, right? And being able to say, okay, how do I build that, right? And that kind of gets more into the coaching aspect of things, but having that awareness is a huge part to develop, because sometimes people only see, I need to work for 40 years.
Yeah, and that's so depressing.
It can be very demotivating.
And people can get trapped in careers and jobs because they've spent a lot of money on an education and they hate it. And they don't think that there are any other options, which is kind of sad when you think about it. like
Mhm.
my youngest daughter again. She was working. All my kids graduate when they're 16 from high school.
Okay.
Just to start with, because I want them to have a couple of years head start, figure out what they want to do, and go for it. So she went to work in the local ice cream factory, and that's the slavery job. They work you a million hours and pay you hardly anything, and
Mhm.
they just have all these rules and stuff. So she did that for a full year, and she saved up a whole bunch of money, and then she decided, Mom, I'm going to take the summer off because, I'm 18. Like,
Mm.
yeah, go for it. So she takes the summer off, and then she decides she's going to become a baker. So she works part-time as a baker, and it's something she loves doing. It fills her creative cup.
Mhm.
It's a little bit of interaction with people, but not a lot. But it meets her needs. It's not full-time, and she's good with it. She has all of these other interests in her life that she can explore and do. So she's not trapped.
Yeah.
And it makes
and
me
what
happy for her that she came to that conclusion on her own.
Right. At such a young age too, right? Because time is the thing that we don't get more of, right?
Yeah.
It's like, how do
Yeah.
you free up time? How do you make your time more valuable to your family, your other maybe distant family, even your workplace, right? How do you make that time when you're there more valuable? And then what do you do to try to create more? You can't create more time, but you can create more space, right? And that's a lot where accountability comes in, and execution and prioritization, right? And sometimes mental health symptoms or TBIs, fallout, that can impact those thought processes, right? And we just kind of get stuck in this gloom of, are things going to get better? I don't know, right? So that's where therapy can come in.
Yeah. Therapy is one of those kind of newer things to come on the scenes in a way that more people can access it than have ever been able to before, I think, at least in my experience.
Yeah.
So what is the one thing you would really hope that people would take away from this conversation today, Daniel?
You are more than your mental health challenges or the fallout from a traumatic brain injury. And those can also look like mental health symptoms too. So could they be lumped together? Sure. But sometimes the traumatic brain injury itself can present as a mental illness, right? But because of those areas of the brain that were injured, I call them different things. So, but that's what I would want people to know, is that you are more than those things. And just
Perfect.
do what you need to do to step into that value.
Do you help people everywhere, or are you only licensed in the state of Colorado?
I'm only licensed in the state of Colorado, so you'd have to have a permanent residence in Colorado. So, but I'm happy to, as you're a therapist and growing, right, you develop connections throughout the country. So if somebody, is like, hey, I'm over in New Jersey or wherever, I'll do my best to try to set you up with a couple of, connections. I can't say that they'll turn out as anything, but I'll do my best to support anyone that's looking to make those changes.
Perfect. So you want to share your website with people?
Yeah. So
if they're in the Colorado area?
Yeah, for sure. So my website is revitalizementalhealth.com. Our Instagram, our Facebook is on there, so you can follow along for updates, and then putting up new blogs for people to read and try to just learn some techniques to manage stress, or lower level symptoms and things like that. But you can submit a form on there. Phone numbers there. Give me a call. So
thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for tuning in to another empowering episode of the U World Order Showcase podcast. We hope you've enjoyed hearing from our incredible life, health, and transformational coaches who are making a profound impact on the world. Remember, change begins with you, and you have the power to transform your life and the lives of others. If you want to take that next step and unlock your true potential, visit thecoachesalchemist.com, where you can find the 3 ways we can help you for free to spin your talent into gold with clarity, a system, and a plan. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you never miss an inspiring episode. And if you enjoyed today's show, we'd greatly appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback means the world to us and helps us reach more people with our positive message. Stay connected with us on social media for updates, behind-the-scenes content, and upcoming guest announcements. You can find us on Facebook at The U World Order or simply visit thecoachesalchemist.com.